Steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict. Thanks for coming back. If you're a return viewer to consume the content, I really appreciate it. What I want to do here is take a look at a very, very cool car. I'm going to share my screen here in just a moment. I want to remind you, if you can, please subscribe to the channel. I certainly appreciate it. I try to go through as many of these cars. I was kind of on a roll, hitting pretty much every single one that hit bring a trailer. However, just with managing different things, I haven't been able to do that as much. So what I want to do is jump in here. Okay, if you stick with me to the end, I'm going to tell you what I think this car will sell for. I'm going to call it like this. It's a 64 Lincoln Continental Convertible. I will say this is a very rare color overall, right? So we'll get more into that. You can see here on the screen that it is at 17,500. There's 5 days left. There's some decent comments going on. There's 17 total so far. When I saw this car pop up on my Apple Watch the other day in terms of the notification, I told myself, hey, I'm super excited to talk about this one because of the color and some of the other items that we're going to talk about here now. We know in 64, there were a total of 3,328 convertibles produced, and that was 190 more than the previous year. So there was a little year-over-year gain, if you will, in the numbers. 64 is a very popular year. There's going to be the purists that love the ones, the twos, the threes, the kind of earlier year Lincolns that have the curved glass. 64, of course, they go to flat glass. And, although they are very sought after, you pretty much kind of find folks, like as you would expect, that like one or the other more. Personally, I will say 64 is a very, very, very popular year. People love to have 64 in terms of just overall vehicles. I think the mid-century modern vibe, but also the front grille is one of those key items that stands out. What we can see here, when I updated the screenshot just a little while ago, I had a screenshot from maybe a year ago on a previous presentation, and I think the concourse condition at that point was 108,000, if I remember correctly. What that tells you is that we've continued to see the prices increase on these Lincolns, okay? I've posted these prices now for a very long time on social media, as well as doing this channel. And it always kind of catches me when somebody goes, oh, wow, a car sold for 135 or 150,000. That's an anomaly. That'll never happen again. It's like, well, I can give you tons of examples of that happening. But at the end of the day, this is the data. We see 135,000 for a concourse, 65,700 for good condition. Of course, add 10%, if you will, for AC, which brings the values up even higher. With this one, we can see the serial number that's copied from Bring a Trailer. And this is the photo here that we just looked at a moment ago. The key thing to point out is the color. Again, the tires, as I mentioned, the tires are going to be something that may not be up to your liking because they're the wide white wall tires. Some people love them. A lot of folks in my generation, we absolutely love them. The older school folks that grew up in these eras, or in this era rather, they tend to go, hey, I want to have the thin white wall, which was more factory or offered by the factory on these particular cars. But again, that's a simple change overall. The main thing that I would want to know is what's the date code, have the tires been on there a long time, that type of thing. They do look like the bias plies, which there are companies that make those to look that way. But of course, the color sticks out, which we're going to talk about, the wide white wall tires. And of course, it does have an organ plate on it. More on that in a moment. The VIN plate, of course, again, we can see at the top, I copied and pasted. If you've been watching the channel, you can probably break some of this down now yourself. And that was always my goal. The first number 4 represents 64, right? That's the last digit of the year, 4 as in 64. The assembly plan is always Wixom. 86 is the 4-door convertible for the body style. The MEL or Mercury Etzel Lincoln is the 430. That's standard pretty much. The last digits of this are pretty low. If you look at, I was talking about the last 6 to 11 digits, but when you look at the 2670, which is right here, that is the 2,670th consecutive unit number. That production would indicate, if we look at the bottom down here, there were 36,297 total units for that 64 model year. That includes the sedans and convertibles. This was a very low number out of that series, 2070. We could see there the prices, the convertible was about $7,000. That would obviously be a little bit higher with potential any factory add-ons, the locking gas cap, things that they would potentially sell, and whatnot. Missed a call here from Scott. Okay. So we can look at the VIN plate again. This is copied. We'll bounce back to bring a trailer in just a moment. The key thing that I want to point out here is that the car is a color G, which is very rare. We'll talk about that. Buckskin paint, that is the name of the paint. The trim is 89, which I was mind blown when I saw this car. We thought for a long time that one of the nicest 64s in existence, a lady in California that owns it, we thought that was the only one. Oh, by the way, I had Jim Lincoln on, our dear friend. He came on the podcast. He talked about how he found a buckskin and palomino car. Wow, now there's two. And oh, by the way, I texted Jim earlier. Shout out to Jim Lincoln. And now there's this one. Wow, another one. So pretty rare in the grand scheme of things, though, overall. If we look at the code, September, ironically, a date that sticks in many of our minds, September 11th, although this would have been of 63. But again, rest in peace to those lost on September 11th, 2001, just on a very date that sticks in our minds, if you will. But September 11th of 63 would have been kind of coming out of that summer, ramping up for the 64 model year, as I've often talked about. 52 DSO. If you watch one of my recent reviews, I talked about the 5.2, why that's so important. That's LA, folks. That's Los Angeles, right? The greater LA area. The Los Angeles District Sales Office is key because that tells us it's a California car. Now, we saw the Oregon plate. We could certainly go, wow, maybe this car didn't spend all of its existence in California. Of course, that's for us to break down. So we'll look at that. The conventional rear axle, and then we have the dual range trans. That's pretty standard. So what I want to is stop sharing just for a moment and again say, stick with me. What we're going to do now is we're going to look over on the Bring a Trailer actual listing. This is where we kind of get down to the meat and potatoes. As I've always told you folks, if you can, try to go look at these cars. But I will tell you, if you don't always have an opportunity, although I always preach that, I mean, that's a best case scenario, right? That you could fly out, you could test drive something. Best case scenario is that. If you can't, you try to get someone to go look at it for you that you may know. Maybe you could pay someone in the area that could go take a look at a car. If those two just did not work out, you would always want to see tons of photos. You'd want to get some visual evidence that this car is what you think this car would be. And that's what we're going to look at now. So let's jump back in. Okay. So again, 17,500 ends in 5 days with 17 comments. Pretty much the majority of the write-up that Bring a Trailer does a great job on is pretty standard. It's the 430 we talked about. The car is said to have been previously located in California. That ties into the DSO. Of course, it was relocated to Oregon. But when? Well, it says here the 1990s, and that's great to know that this car, from 63 to some point in 60, call it 30 years, existed in the great state of California in terms of the climate. That's a great thing. The exterior was refinished under the prior ownership. It was acquired by the seller in 2024. So at this point, they bought it. They maybe realized they're either going to flip it, they got it for a good deal at an estate sale or something to that effect. But for whatever reason, they're going to move on from it, and that's okay. But it does reinforce that this car was probably owned by one, maybe two families over the course of that time, which is always cool to know. It's got some standard information here and it has a clean Oregon title. The car was delivered, we know, in buckskin, which is key. That's pretty kind of details that we've already covered. The selling dealer, if you will, notes dents in the body as well as wear on the soft top, which is going to be standard on one of these cars for the most part, especially if it was driven. 15-inch steel wheels, of course, have the polished caps. It says polished covers. I don't think that they're high-speed polished. They still have that satin look to them. Some of us, I have a set that are polished, and they kind of look more chrome, but I don't think that's what they were stating here. We can see that it has the Palomino interior, which we talked about. The factory push-button radio does not work. There is a Bluetooth-capable stereo that's been mounted in the glove box. I like that approach. Leave the factory radio. I've talked about that. You can upgrade the guts, if you will, the inside of these old school radios and utilize them Bluetooth wise, believe it or not. But I like leaving it, especially if it doesn't work. It's a lot to take this dash apart, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And the glove box option is fantastic. I can't see in this one photo, I noticed this when I was scrolling through earlier doing some prelim. There is a weird dent in the gas pedal. I don't think I've ever seen this on any of these cars, because you'd think if the gas pedal was always there, how would this have ever happened? But regardless, you could go to the usual suspects, the usual Lincoln folks like the Lincoln Lands of the world, and buy a gas pedal. Those are out there. There's plenty of decent amount of parts cars. I'm sure a gas pedal isn't probably the number one piece that's sold. Now, if this is a nice gas pedal, it might be fine. It might be tough to find one, but certainly you could get one, I would say, overall. The odometer reads K, which I think is fantastic. Now, is the odometer continuing to work? Reason why I say is when I got my blue 64 Lincoln Continental Convertible, the odometer just didn't work, and it hasn't worked. So, that's possible, but 58 to 60 to 70,000 K isn't some crazy anomaly. We continue to see these cars at that ticker, if you will, when we go through these reviews. It's just some of these cars were kind of weekend cruisers and whatnot, especially over the course of time. What we can see, of course, is the original MEL. We do see that it has a 2-port, not the more desirable 3-port. We can see that it has the single pot reservoir. We can also see that it has the DSO 52 for California emissions. It does have the different cap for the oil filler, that also has the hose that goes over to the air cleaner. That is part of the California emissions. That is what you would want to see on a DSO 52 or any DSO for California. Engine bay overall looks good. You've got your typical black, which is the correct colors for this particular car. It's not blue. And we see the fan shroud there. Now, what we don't see is the air AC compressor. I can tell you this is an AC car. We'll see that with the vents. However, the seller has been active in the comments, and he has reinforced that some of those parts have been misplaced, or they may not have them all. But certainly, if it's an AC car, you want to add the 10% to the Haggerty values. What you could also then do is, I have a video on my channel of how to upgrade if you wanted to go to a newer condenser. If you wanted to upgrade it kind of to newer components, you can keep the factory York air compressor, which unfortunately is not here, or you could go with a newer style sand-in compressor. Those are some options for you, but certainly it's not there. Really, one of the key things here is underneath. And when I look at these photos, I see a car that if I was looking to add another 64 or a 64 to my collection, my gut feeling is I like what I'm seeing underneath this car. But that's just my personal opinion. I love to see the originality, less everything sprayed over and things like that. And I think that's what we're seeing. Now, this is a key thing for anybody that's going to potentially sell on Bring a Trailer, and for some reason the stuff's not loading. Let's try this again. This is the Continental Convertible top operation, and there is a driving video as well, which is fantastic. What I want to do is look at the photos, right? So what we see is the buckskin color, which some people do not like, right? That's one thing. If you do not like this color, totally get it, right? I totally get that. But I will say it is rare. And if you're looking, or you're a type of person that likes more rare cars and things of that nature, certainly that's going to be kind of a standout thing for you. And it could just be my internet connection here, could be drowning out a little bit, which would not be good. But the 64 grill is very distinctive. It kind of has that forward stance with those 5 pieces here that you see. When I look at this pot metal, to me, from this angle, it looks really good. The chrome looks good, okay? It doesn't maybe look like it's going to be a 100-point car. I totally get that. You can look in here, and you can see a little bit. It's hard to tell, if this is just old wax or whatever. But you can more than likely get in here and polish all this. I also continue to reinforce that I love the way my car is more of a patina. Like, I can clean it up, I can polish the stainless if I want, but I like the originality, the kind of the oxidated paint, oxidation, if you will, on the paint and whatnot. But again, that's going to be your preference. Okay, this kind of reinforces that. I wouldn't say that they're high-speed polished. These are just the standard wheel covers, aka hubcaps. You've got the black, of course, in there, and they're the standard kind of satin look. The tires do appear to be either like a Coker style that they make to look like a bias ply, or just a bias ply tire. I've driven on, when I got my car, it had, believe it or not, very, 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 very old. I don't even know the date code on them. I wish I would have looked at that point, but old bias ply tires. And these cars, it's a cool look. but I'm a radial guy. I just like riding on radials, just easier. Everyone's going to have a preference on that, of course. Okay, we can kind of get down here to some of the money shots. These are important photos because one, it's kind of showing you with all of the doors open, which I like to see, but it also kind of gives us a little bit of view into the pillar here. We can kind of take a look and see, how weathered is the paint in here. We can look and see that it has the original door pins, which were black. That's key. It's hard to tell if the carpet is original. If it looks like the pad is underneath here, and it's hard to tell, but you certainly could go to like the Jim Wallaces of the world and get new carpet. The carpet does look pretty good. My assumption is that would have been changed at some point. It's hard to tell if it has the heel pad in here. It almost looks like it doesn't. Jim Wallace kits, as I've reinforced, they incorporates a heel pad into the carpet, and that's key because that's the way it was from the factory. We've got the black dash, which I think was standard with the Palomino interior. It's very rare. I have to go back and look at some of the photos of the other two that I'm aware of. But to me, it doesn't look bad at all. I have a blue Lincoln, and I believe in 64, all of the main dash pads were black or kind of that darker sheen. Mine almost looks blue, but my lower dash is blue and things like that. So, I'm looking at the car now. It's, to me, the black is kind of what you're going to see in an interior like this. We can see that it has the original steering wheel. Everything looks pretty much original other than the kick panels within the car. This is a good photo. Typically these pieces here, the A-pillars, you're going to want to get in here with some of the quadruple zero wool and some Brasso or similar style polish, and you can polish this stuff up really, really nicely. I've done it in mine. And as you can imagine, these cars are going to get a little bit of moisture in them potentially over time, and they will build up a little bit of nastiness, if you will, on some of these pieces, but they're stainless and they can be cleaned up. The dash pad is not perfect, and I do like this photo. You can find dash pads out there if this is something that was driving you crazy. It's hard to tell, like, maybe over the course of time, the car was just parked in the driveway and it really got sun beating on it. I've seen dash pads a little bit nicer condition, but certainly this is not a deal breaker at all, in my opinion. You get a little bit better view here of the kick panels. I think in 66, you could get a speaker, because I had a 66 or 67, you could get a speaker in the kick panel. This would be an aftermarket type thing here. You could always get another set of kick panels or have somebody, interior guy, go through and recarpet those. I do believe there is a scratch. I don't think that it's a crack. Maybe it's a crack. I think there's a scratch in the windshield. There's some people that can polish out those windshields. That would maybe drive me crazy. I'm not a fan of having to change the windshield on these old Lincolns because with the trim and stuff, it kind of fits the one time, and guys can do it. I'm not going to say that you can't take the windshield on and put it back in. You certainly can, but if you don't have to, I kind of look at it and go, don't do it. We could see, like, with the typical dash here, this bezel, you've got some normal imperfections. Again, I like that overall. Just it's the originality of the car. We could tell that it is an AC car because it does have the AC vents. If this was a non-AC car, those vents would not be there. That's one thing you may not know. You've got some different angles of the photos, which I definitely appreciate in here. And one thing that you guys could maybe chime in on, the back of the seats, I do not believe these pieces were carpet. These were also leather, and the back of the seats, they do not look perfect. Those are some things over the course of time that it's possible. I'm going to go out on a limb, and I think you guys are going to be able to chime in and tell me 100% for sure, because Jim Ayers, shout out to Jim from the West Coast, he's reinforced this to me. If we count these buttons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That is more than the factory, okay? I think we can confidently say this interior has been swapped out. Also, look at the seat compared to the door panels, okay? There's the contrast in color. If it was me, I would look to try to find like a Jim Wallace or someone that could replicate that original interior, and I would redo the seats and make them the Palomino interior, right? That's going to add a little bit of the ambiance, I think, to the overall car. I don't think that's the right word, but I think you realize where I'm going with it. You can see here again with some of these money shots, this is interesting to look in here. There's a little bit of buildup, which I didn't notice this in my preliminary. Probably not the end of the world. These cars aren't typically perfect. You can see a little bit of crustiness around the switch. A lot of these cars, these old school door switches don't work anyways. You'd have to spray some WD-40 and kind of work those a little bit. but I do believe the replacements that came out over the course of time, I think a lot of them were white, if I remember Chris Dunn at Lincoln Land telling me that. Now, I'm going to share a couple other key facts here in just a minute, so please stick with me if you're still with me here. We can see the top is white. Again, the rear seats also appear to be redone, not only because of the color, but because of the amount of buttons. And I forget the count, but I know the count. I don't believe the count is 10. Looks like they did one per each pleat, and I could see why they would do that, but one thing that I do not believe has been discussed in here is if the rear auto drops work. And it's hard to tell if they're down in those photos. I think I need to go back to other couple photos. The reason why that's of significance, and it does not appear that that door is down at all, that window rather. The significance there is we've talked about that on these convertibles, when you open the rear door and you push the button in and you go to, open the door, this window drops, 3 to 4 inches ish. What that does is it brings it out of the way of this convertible molding up here. Okay. When you close the door, even if the front door is open, you close this rear door, the auto drop is going to auto go up and it's going to seal against this. Now, the other tell is the corner of this happened on my 64, so I know. When these tops start to get older and these auto drops aren't working, the rear corner of this window, this flat glass window, is going to catch right on the convertible here and it's going to kind of rip a little bit. It's not the end of the world. You got a couple of options. You either get the auto drops replaced, you can use the power switch on the driver's side or the power switch on the rear passenger if you want to put the window down and then manually roll it up. There's those couple of options. If the windows do not work at all, I've kind of talked about a good amount that, you're going to have to find someone that's going to be willing to kind of pull the door panel, rebuild what they need to rebuild, clean the tracks, things like that. But certainly the auto drops working would be a huge plus. What we can see here in the trunk, a few things, right? There is not the, what I call the convertible trunk bar. John Cashman was a leader in reinforcing this, and I'm just trying to carry on that legacy. There's a bar that you need to install. You could go to Home Depot, you could buy the square tubing or the round tubing, and it's going to land right on this rivet knuckle, if you will. And it's really easy to install. It's going to cost you about 15, 20 bucks, and you could do it with yourself and one other person without unbolting anything, believe it or not. But it will ensure that these cast pieces always remain taut and tight and that they don't crack over time. That can and does happen. It actually happened to someone that I know not too long ago. We talked about it and literally within the next week it happened. So crazy. We can see here you've got the often referred to as the toilet seat, unfortunately, because this kind of flaps open. It looks like a toilet. But this all looks original. It's possible that at some point the trunk interior was redone. What I like about it is it's all there. Underneath the deck lid, you're going to see when we go over to the pros of the listing, from what we can see here, this looks really good. I've seen a ton of these. We've seen a ton of these photos. And underneath, oftentimes, they're very crunchy because of the adhesive that was used and the moisture that it holds and things like that. So what I would say is overall, that's a huge win on this car. We can see one of the dents and dings right here that they mentioned in the description. We also see that it has the 65 taillights. Not the end of the world. It's essentially the same taillight. However, in 65, you have these cages, if you will. Some folks over the course of time, maybe they knew somebody that had a set, they kind of like to swap them just because it was an easy mod, if you will. But certainly I think a lot of folks would probably either not care or they would just end up snagging a set. Technically 61 through 63 would fit in there perfectly fine, but you could go for some 64 and that would be perfect there. We would want to see photos underneath the car, and certainly they have produced that. The rockers look good on this car. The floor pans look good. To me, the coloring is the way you would want a car that's 60 years old to look. Okay. To me, I like that originality. Okay. I like being able to look underneath here and go, yeah, at some point, maybe they cleaned up, some things in here. But for the most part, this doesn't look like it was a lipstick job last night to try to, bring in more money for the auction. Again, this car to me, everything underneath looks like a true car, kind of what I would refer to as a survivor. And I think that that is a key thing. And I apologize, a little bit of blurriness here on some of the photos as I'm tabbing through. That's on my end. We can also see that the exhaust is redone, which is awesome. But when I look underneath this car and I see the black and I see, that the true essence of what this car is, with that 58,000 or so miles over the course of time, everything in here looks good. This is what I would want to see in photos. I would want to study these areas and see, like, wow, is there any, crustiness? Is there any rust going on? I mean, from what we can see here, certainly not, which I love seeing. It's getting harder and harder to find these cars in this condition. Okay, so I've rambled on a lot on this one, but here's what I want to reinforce. It's a complete car. The original car hasn't been redone or resto modded. Sure, it's got a couple things. It's got the radio in the glove box. I would have liked to see a few more photos, but it's all there. It's original. It's a desirable year. 64 is very sought after. Only 31, 38, I think I quoted, convertibles built. It's a rare color, right? So it's not a black Lincoln. So many people want a black Lincoln. That's okay. I like it that it's so rare. We'll talk about the color rarity in just a moment. The top and windows work per the photos and videos. I believe the windows work because we saw the windows down. I would like to see a video of the windows, potentially all working, including the vent windows, including the auto drops if possible. It is an AC car, although it does need some work. Having an air-conditioned car is a huge benefit because you can enjoy the car depending on where you live, and then you can always come back and you can upgrade it or put the original parts in it. Those parts aren't super hard to find because there are parts cards out there. So if you wanted to get the original York-style compressor, you can get that. The undercarriage looks really good. The deck lid looks really good, and it's a DSO 52 car. I'm going to close with a couple things that I'm going to share on my screen. In September 2022, out at the Ratties Rat Fest, shout out to the kinfolk in California, I got to see Jim Lincoln on the right in this photo, and the other car, Elena, I believe is her name, if I'm saying that right, which I think was a second owner car. She's owned it since like 78 or something in the mid 70s. It's a stunning car. Of course, she's used to going to the LCOC type event, so she had her top up. That's a thing that when you go to those concourse style shows and whatnot, you're going to realize, like, at the beginning of the show, the tops are up, everything's kind of closed up. And then after the car is judged is typically when they're going to open the hood and things like that. Of course, she did have her windows and vent windows open. But Jim Lincoln's buckskin and palomino car next to the other buckskin and palomino, I thought was super cool. Here's a photo. You can see old school and two great folks enjoying their cars. Buckskin, the color code G, was discontinued on November 25th, 1963. I do not have any confirmation on why, but it was replaced with a burnished bronze metallic code P for the 64 model year. That means from, like, basically, let's call it late, it could be July, August, for those few months, let's call it 4 months, that was the only period where you could get that car. After November 25th, 63, it wasn't there anymore. Although I've always felt in 66, there's a color, which you can see on the screen on YouTube, teakwood, color H code, is a similar color. If I saw it in person, I may say it's not. But if anybody has any intel on why the color was discontinued, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. So a few things to consider, and then we'll wrap it up. 64 amp gauge has to be rebuilt, has to be bypassed, has to be updated. And when I say updated, I mean via, like, going to something like Decoded Digital. There's a couple other options. Pat TN has done, a conversion. Certainly that stuff could be done, but you either need to bypass it or you need to have it rebuilt. Those are the two big things. Reason being, all the power from the car for the interior comes through the amp gauge, and that amp gauge can cause a fire. So that has to be done. The cost of replacing the hydraulic top, if all original, I am going to show you this, and again, I apologize. I know this video has went a little longer than my standard videos. I was so excited to talk about this, but I haven't showed this before. This hydroelectric company that's in Florida, their kit, give or take, is about 19 tax. Okay, this is the kit for the pump, the rams, the cylinders, the solenoids, and the lines that you see here. So just know, I always say, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? But if you've got an original car, you can't expect to buy a 64 Lincoln for whatever that price is going to be and then feel like you're never going to have an issue with it. Eventually the line and things are going to have to be changed. You might go 10 years and then it has to be done. There's a lot of pressure going through those lines, and I've seen them blow out. But certainly, I wouldn't do anything until the top, dare I say, wasn't working. Okay, so there's that price. If you were not familiar with Hydroelectric, they're in Florida. You can also call John Cashman. You can also call Lincoln Land, and you can order those parts. There is a 2-port versus a 3-port on the car, which again, I would like to see a 3-port. But that's kind of splitting hairs, I think, and depending on where you live with the climate and how hot it is. It does have the 65 taillights, not a big deal. You can change them, you can throw those on a shelf. 65 taillights actually sell for a good amount of money, so you could easily sell those and then just easily buy another set. The lower steering column bushing is going to have to be redone. Unfortunately, in the video, when they parked the car, they left it running, they got out, they walked around it, including right behind the car. I often talk about you should never do this, right? I know some people think I'm crazy. I have photos of cars. These cars will fall into reverse and they will shoot off and they can run you over. We've seen them. I haven't personally seen it, but Teresa at Lincoln Land seen a car back in the 80s or 90s, boom, smash into a concrete building, like total these cars. It can happen, folks. And I talk about it. There's other videos on my channel. There is a single pot master cylinder. I get that's the originality of it. But someone mentioned this the other day. If you have speed control, which this car does not have, it does make it almost impossible to fit a dual reservoir in that engine bay with speed control. I've seen it done. This car does not have speed control. I certainly would want to do that and kind of maybe update the brakes a little bit as soon as I got it. And then this needs a 6465 trunk bar installed per the video on my channel, which I've talked about in the past. With that being said, I know I've rambled on. I would love to hear from you folks in the comments. God, if I had more room, I'd be looking to buy this car. Good luck to the seller. Good luck to the buyer. Stay on the rise, everyone. ODB, we out of here.
Welcome to LA where the players play, and we ride on the things like every day.